Sound. Testing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Testing in my butthole. Ouch. Bloody.
Welcome back to Dean and Dave Do Movies.
Lots of movies we've been doing, but the movie we've done recently, Crimes of the Future.
Rated R?
Fucking rated R for sure.
We're back to our old habits.
Yeah, we got family friendly for a moment, then we realized we hate family friendly movies, so we're moving on to something a little more, not controversial, but I guess it's more gross.
Grotesque.
Vile.
Yeah.
What's it about?
Oh, man. We got David Cronenberg's Crime of the Future, 1 hour, 47 minutes. His first original script since existence in 1999. You're right. It was late 90s.
So that was 23 years.
Yeah.
2020.
Man, it feels so. I remember seeing the trailers for this movie when it came out, but and thinking it was kind of strange. But anyways, we got horrid. Howard Shore is the composer for this movie. He did all the Lord of the Rings movies. FYI.
Which ties us into Viggo Mortensen. Maybe that's
I guess
the connection.
so.
Although Viggo Mortensen, I wonder who was cast first. I wonder if they did the composer or like are they packaged? Just because they work in Lord of the Rings, are they packaged together?
Right. It was funny. I did think Viggo Mortensen in this movie was channeling a little bit of what's his name? Aragon. Yeah, he was channeling just because of the little hood, but. Yeah, Viggo Mortensen in this movie plays Saul Tenser. He's the main character in this film. He plays a futuristic performer in this universe, right?
Yes, so he's a performer that has, I believe it was called, I wrote it down, but it was...
Performer and celebrity.
Getting ahead of me here. I got it later in my notes, but it was advanced evolution syndrome, and so what he had was new organs growing within him,
right?
In which performance-wise with Leah Sado,
right,
who plays his very
gorgeous Leah Sado, yeah,
very fun
Caprice,
and she's his performance artist who cuts him open and helps pull out the organs.
Very sexy.
Very sexy and very thrilling. Let me tell you, I've never got more turned on seeing people cut open. I don't think I've ever seen people get cut open as intensely as this movie.
No.
Or at least not as beautifully done. Artsy.
Sure. Kristen Stewart's also in this movie. She plays Timlin along with Don McKellar, who is new to me, but he played Whippet. They're kind of like the surgery or surgeon duo
for
this movie.
They're the official organ registers.
Right.
So they have like the official business. So this is the kind of world where Leah, or let's use the name, Caprice and Saul are in the underworld and trying to find a legitimate way to break into it or to get it more normalized. That's where you get Timlin and Whippet. And you speak about channeling other characters. I found that Kristen Stewart really brought back her Twilight days because she was a little awkward.
She fit in, yeah.
She was a little weird and definitely had that like love for blood. I don't know if the vampires are blood, but she definitely was not afraid of bodily harm. She
fit right in, I think, in this kind of movie. So the synopsis for this movie is basically that humans have adapted to a synthetic environment with new transformations and new mutations. With his partner Caprice, Saul Tenser, celebrity performance artist, publicly showcases the metamorphosis of his organs in avant-garde performances.
Doesn't get more avant-garde than having French people in the French accents. When you watch the movie, I was like, wow, this is very artsy. Really feeling itself, and what's the word I'm looking for? Not like full of itself, but definitely had like certain like stuck-up arrogant moments, and I was like,
sure.
Oh, it's like a, no offense, French film.
I think that's pretty accurate, yeah. And I mean, I think it's we'll get into it a bit later, but I think it's very, very true to what this movie is. It had a budget of estimated at $35 million. And the worldwide gross that I got was 4.5. So this movie did not resonate with audience members. Barely was receptive to the people at the film festival, because originally this movie, people kind of walked out within the first 5 minutes. And then also at the end, I guess he got a 6-minute standing ovation. So I guess very polarizing film. And I mean, I guess polarizing subject matter as well, right?
And being a David Cronenberg film, it I guess you would consider. Would you call him a cult classic director? Because I feel like when you look at movies like The Fly, or he even had in 1970s a movie Crimes of the Future, which shared the same name, but besides for being kind of like weird and grotesque, it didn't share a lot of similarities. But I guess you would call him like a cult classic, right? So
I think that's fair, yeah.
So having 4.5 million for this kind of movie seems pretty reasonable. Like, it sounds like a good amount of money,
right,
for a movie which we'll go more into that comes to cutting open and removing body parts.
Yeah, and I think part of what you said about it kind of feeling like a French film might have something to do with the fact that it didn't do as well at the box office, right? That it is that a bit more
but
trying to be upper class.
I just couldn't imagine, like, a 6-minute standing ovation. That's impressive.
I think another movie at the festival, the same festival, got like an 8-minute one. So I was just like, oh, wow, okay.
It really makes the 6 look shitty. I got 6 minutes. What about you? Oh, 8 minutes. Fuck you. You know, there's a little...
Loser.
Yeah, loser, man. You couldn't even get 2 more... You couldn't even get 120 seconds out of him, man.
Yeah.
You suck.
Yeah. So the film began filming in August of 2021 in Greece. And most of this movie, from my understanding, was filmed in one warehouse. So very... very tight filming.
I guess in Greece they have a very big warehouses.
A lot of good warehouses, yeah.
That's what I think of when I think of Greece. I think of the plumbing isn't so good, so you can't put toilet paper always down the toilet because it'll cause plumbing issues.
Interesting.
And warehouses.
Warehouses, yeah.
Oh,
and weddings, big fat weddings.
And delicious lemon potatoes.
Lemon potatoes are delicious.
I want to say, so it's a really interesting concept from him. It's creepy. What's Art Deco even mean? Is it Art Deco?
Oh man, now you're testing me here. I don't know. I thought that was more like a visual style for homes or something. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Well, I've been wrong before, so I'd be surprised. There's also titties, and that's always a positive. But diving into the film, I want to give my pros and cons. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for my pro. We'll hear what you think about this. I thought it was a really interesting concept. Looking into it, I couldn't find a lot that agreed with me, but I found that it had a very like pro-Earth feeling to it. So
I can I agree with that.
There's another section's like somewhat of a cult. They actually call it like a cell. So which thinks of like an eco-terrorist group where people are evolving, and this group, the guy Langdon I'm thinking Langdon because of Professor Robert Langdon from Da Vinci Code, Tom Hanks, but it's Lang Dotrice, who was Scott Speedman, who reminds me of an Australian Hugh Jackman, who was also kind of like Bob Odenkirk. He's a funny mix there, but he has like this cell, and it's people that are embracing like the evolution because Viggo Mortensen has this accelerated evolution syndrome. And because of that, they're making this food that drives some plastics. And my thought of that was it was like a pro-Earth, we're going to be fixing this. I couldn't find anything to help like back me up on that. But I thought that was an interesting spin. Even if it wasn't intended, I thought that was a very interesting way to look into it. Another thing was it brought them into the world of artists. So I believe it was Viggo and David Cronenberg, but Viggo was saying that playing this role of cutting himself open as a performance artist was like in a sense like other kind of arts, even being an actor, because he's exposing himself to vulnerabilities, letting people look inside of him, being completely vulnerable, and showing the life of an artist who's trying to make it and be innovative and new and exciting, but showing also the lengths that artists have to go through in order to be relevant and new and exciting and really captivate audiences. So I thought those were a couple of good points that were very interesting, and I wouldn't say new, but just done in a very different style.
No, totally. And to piggyback on that, actually, one of the interviews I saw with Cronenberg, he equated it to his experience of, writing and directing. It's like you do have to expose yourself and lay yourself bare and your concepts bare when you create a film, and it is very raw, and it is very, as you kind of said about acting. So I found that parallel to be interesting, and to be pretty accurate. Yeah, interesting film, like very Cronenberg-esque. Like it, I wasn't surprised by it in any way. Like in the sense that, when you watch a Cronenberg movie, you're gonna kind of be, I think, maybe tested a little bit and put on edge.
It's okay to be clueless. That's something that it teaches you. It teaches you to have an open mind and an open heart.
Well, I think his movies too, they're a bit slower, but they're very methodical. Like it kind of takes you some time to buy into them or to get drawn into them. and this film I didn't think was any different. One of the things I kind of was mentioning to you earlier too was like, you know, the technology in this film was very, you know, it's very, I think it's called, they call it biomimicry, where it's like technology that's built to maybe replicate the way nature is set up, you know? And so the technology in this is kind of very, you know, it's inorganic, but it's kind of made to look more organic than a lot of the technology we have in this day and age, which I found to be an interesting choice, considering like the characters in this film are kind of going through the reverse, where they're organic beings who are trying to
stop evolution.
Well, or evolve to be able to like adapt to all this inorganic stuff, which I found kind of also like an interesting parallel. So yeah, no, I think, you know, if you've seen a Cronenberg movie before, this movie, you know, you'll be in familiar territory. I don't know. Yeah, very, very strange film. Like, it's definitely not for everyone. Definitely a lot of like body horror, you know, as people walked out during the film festivals, because they were, you know, like a lot of surgery in this film, a lot of like weird strangeness, and that makes people uncomfortable. I have to admit, I don't necessarily like, you know, seeing needles going into people or people being cut into, but it's kind of like one of those things where it's also like, it's scary, but it's also exhilarating at the same time. So I think that's kind of how I would frame, you know, this movie for people.
It's a good way to test yourself, that when you watch, even though it was done very well, there were a lot of parts of it where it wasn't CGI and they were using more human crafted prosthetics.
Yeah.
So when they slice into it, it was a little eerie and edgy, but it also made you question yourself and say, I can still watch this and find it interesting. What's that make me think of myself?
Right.
But I believe in the tattoo world, it's biomech, where people will get tattoos that make themselves look almost like the Terminator, where it has like inside is robotic. So it's that kind of idea, but reverse, right? Because you're taking things that should be more robotic or metal and making it human-like. They had a really interesting bed that he slept on, which I thought was a fucking monster for the longest time, because it had like these weird tentacles that hooked up to you, and that was very nerve-wracking for me, because I was expecting kind of like some spidery mouth or some weird, like, ever since Nope, I've been very scared of like that open mouth kind of creature.
Sure, yeah.
So that got me. And then I'm going to start leading into negatives after this, and one of the cons was there was a bit of goofiness. So there was this one chair that kind of looked like a skeleton, and it basically had parts that moved your arms, shifted your hips, and moved the head. And we were discussing it when we were watching it. Luckily, we were able to have the pause features. We rented this movie, but I was like, "Oh, the way that it looks, it probably just helps digest." Turns out that's all it did. It just helped you eat. Which little did you know, humans are changing to the next evolutionary step, struggling eating normal food. So these chairs were invented to help with the digestion.
Right.
And there was also I believe it was called the Scab, was the autopsy machine, which wasn't meant for performance art, but artists have utilized it as they describe in the film. And that was interesting. It was just like a big sarcophagus looking thing that could open up the face and the body while they dissected you. But then the control for it, you made this point, looked like a frog. It was like a glow-up frog, like almost like a gross kid's toy.
Well, she was also kind of holding it close, like, to her sternum too, and kind of like playing it almost like it was like a little, like
a recorder,
or you know,
ocarina.
Yeah, it was like an instrument of some kind. It was interesting, but also very weird, and like it kind of just very much. Again, I never saw Existence, but I remember the trailers, and it just really brought me back to that, and it was just very Cronenberg to me. Yeah. I feel like, these guys, like, they're kind of like a lame X-Men, right? Like, they're not, they're kind of evolving in a way, but, you know, some people are getting more ears, he's getting these weird organs, they can't really eat regular food anymore. Way less exciting.
That's where, so, it's funny when people walk out, was when you watch the trailer, or at least images, one of the first things I saw for this movie was a guy with multiple ears all over his face, getting his eyes and mouth sewn shut. Yeah. So if that's not enough to make you say, if you're not into that, you probably shouldn't watch the movies. When people walk out, I'm like, how could you watch a guy have his eyes sewn shut? Because to me, that's one of the most disturbing thoughts.
Well, it's like, don't they know it's a movie too? So, like, it's not real. So it's just like, you know, like, close your eyes or whatever and, like, move past it. And, like, you know, the movie will continue and it won't all be that. I don't know.
If you're willing to buy the ticket after that and after knowing it's a Cronenberg film.
Yeah.
Unless you went into it blind. But regardless, I would have to add a con in a way, though, because even though it was interesting, it had the biomech, it had these different ways of art expression. It got a bit goofy at times, like talking about that chair.
Right.
There's these parts where they were going for that, you know, avant-garde artsy look, but it kind of took me out of it. And this is kind of a spoiler alert, but when I got to the ear guy, it starts off, he does not see, you know, that's his eyes being sewn.
Right.
He does not speak, so is his mouth, but he listens, something to that regard. And then it's him posing, His whole body is just in underwear, ears flourishing all over the body.
Yeah.
Really prosperous of ears he was. Then this music starts bumping. He starts dancing, almost like this weird, I don't know, it just looked like some like German kinky.
Yeah, it was like EDM type thing, yeah.
And that took about 40 minutes to get to this point. I was in that suspenseful thriller, somewhat scared state. As soon as that happened, took me out of it. I found it pretty goofy.
Okay.
I was still interested,
yeah.
But that point made me laugh out loud, and it kept away from the avant-garde and made it seem a little ridiculous in my opinion.
Interesting, because for me, I have to be honest, like, yes, it was strange, but it also, I think it kind of had a different effect for me, because for the whole movie, they're like, oh, surgery's a new sect, this guy's a performance artist of the future kind of thing, a celebrity, but I kind of hadn't really seen any examples, or a great amount of examples, as to like of that example in this world being real, and this was like the first perspective of it, and like kind of helped me to understand, what that means in this world and what that looks like with this character. As much, it was a very iconic image, I would think. For me, it didn't drop me out as much. It gave me a good example of what to expect in this world. But still, a very, very bizarre world, and one that I've personally found a very hard time wrapping my head around. I'm not, again, one for body horror or for watching someone get injected with anything, or even myself for that matter. So yeah, like I don't know. For me, I couldn't. It's hard for me to see a future where it looks like this, and maybe it does. Who knows? But yeah, I found a very hard time buying into this future. And one thing I didn't really, I guess, clue into in the movie, I don't know if I just missed it or went over my head or whatever, but in this future, pain is not a thing. Like, they've eradicated pain, and that's what's allowed for them to go under surgery and stay conscious, and to be able to make it as performance art. Because like nowadays, you could do that maybe with certain surgeries, but by and large you couldn't, just because people get put under due to the pain. But in this universe, they've eradicated pain, and that's what allows for this art to be a thing. Which is, I don't know, did you realize that during the movie? Because I didn't kind of clue into that until I read about it afterwards.
Well, good 2 points to add on to that. Number one, it was a great disclaimer that you mentioned you don't like needles going into you, because now we all know for a fact you're not a heroin user. So that's a great. But for the second one, they did glance over that pain isn't a thing, and that's why even Timlin and Kristen Stewart says pain is the new sex. They didn't dive into as much of why they don't have pain.
Yeah.
The accelerated evolution syndrome.
I guess help get rid of that, maybe, or.
So that was another part that was interesting, confusing, but I found it probably went over my head if it was explained, but it wasn't clarified. My thoughts on that were maybe it's a world that's been desensitized, especially now with a lot of wars going on, and with a lot of these like disturbing videos, and how. Besides for like all like that really bad dark web stuff, even like normally on YouTube, there's a lot more swearing. Like you see like there's jackass, people getting hurt, but then there's videos of people like breaking their arms, and there's videos of people like reacting to people like really damaging themselves. So it might also have like another speech of how, well, the movie, one of the points I wanted to get across was how even though we're evolving as a species, we're almost devolving in a way, like we're going against ourselves. And again, that's where I was kind of getting more of a climate perspective on it. But I'm thinking with the pain, maybe it was just a way for them to say we've desensitized ourselves, and with the way the culture's going, that is almost where else do we have to go at this point?
Right.
We're getting so used to war and pain and suffering that's going to be our new arousal.
Yeah. And I mean, you hear people like, Elon Musk talking about Neuralink and stuff like that. And, it doesn't sound too far-fetched given the circumstances we're in nowadays, given how desensitized people are to so many things due to, what's available in the world now, at least in the Western world, and like what's accessible in terms of, the internet and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's not too far-flung. But again, like kind of touching on what you just said, I did find some of the explanations for how we got here in the movie to be kind of vague, and that didn't really help me buy into it. And the other thing too is like a lot of this movie was filmed in a warehouse. We didn't really get to see a whole lot of this world. Like it was very much, shrouded in darkness, or like indoors or whatever. And so like it was very, I don't know, it was a very contained film.
I thought that was good for the plot, because we can dive more into how it turns out that Saul Tenser is actually working undercover with the police to dive more into this world, because they wanted. So that was another part that was kind of explained, that they wanted to dive into this underground ring. One, because Lang and this cult, they want to see what this cult's actually doing because they don't know much about it, and they know that they're trying to get people to evolve more. And so there was an undertone of evolution wasn't acceptable to a certain degree.
Right.
Maybe because the human species have made it so that they're ruining more and more of the earth, so they don't want anyone to evolve, they don't want anyone to change because they've already done enough damage. And then number two, there was that, or like there's that contest, that like best organ growing contest.
Right.
They wanted him to be part of, which they talked about and then did not conclude or explore anymore. With all that being said, I found, because a lot of it was shot in darkness and kind of indoors, I felt that worked because it is an underground scene and it's all dark and meant to be kept secret. So even though visually it was interesting, it wasn't as gorgeous as, let's say, the Northman, which was visually stunning, but coming from Eagers as well, that's one of the main points. I felt like this was more on the body horror and more of mental avant-garde feeling.
No, I think that's a good point, for sure.
Here's a question for you. We're going to dive into the police aspect of it. What did you feel about Saul? He was undercover. Do you think he was like a cop who wanted to join the ring, or do you think he was maybe someone who was... Because I have a couple thoughts that maybe he was, one, cop going undercover. Two, maybe he was an artist who was discovered through the cops and this was his way of not like getting into trouble. Or the third thing, maybe he was genuinely a performance artist who found all of it a little disturbing and didn't want it to carry on any further. So maybe he went to the police to try to help stop it from becoming too much.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to you about this before. I thought, to me, the need for him to be involved with the cops, given his circumstances, given that this stuff is not above board and a bit more, underground, it made me question why he was in communication with the cops. Why? Because it seemed like in a way that he was willing to sell out his own people. And so, to me, I thought it was more interesting if, you see these movies like Donnie Brasco or whatever, where it's the cop who goes undercover, who gets too deep and then loses where he is in the world. And I found, is that what this kind of movie could be about? Is he a guy who got into the scene to learn about it and then maybe got too deep, became this artist, and then now he's, stuck in between two worlds where he's this person who's evolving and he understands those people, and then he's also feeling compelled to kind of maybe help the cops out or give some kind of perspective. So yeah, I don't know. To me, that would have been the more interesting take. I don't think the movie makes a definitive decision totally either way. It's a bit vague, but yeah, I always just question why he was willing to help the cops, given that it seemed like he was selling out his own. So I don't know. What did you think in this situation?
To be honest with you, I think I'm leaning towards he didn't want any further damage. I think he was an artist that saw it getting a little out of hand, and I think he also saw the harm it was doing to himself. So I think he was willing to speak to the cops because he didn't want it to go any further. But near let's kind of jump a little further along. So when we get to Lang and Lang's gang, because that's a fun name to say, the plastic
gang, I
eater.
like it, yeah.
They could have used a lot. It was already goofy enough. They could have used that to make it fun. But it got to the point where he gained that Lang's trust. Kind of a callback to The Fly. There's this whole beginning of the movie scene where there's this kid sitting by the water, by these boats looking for plastic, and the mom's like, get the fuck out of there, what are you doing, don't eat shit. Then the mom's like in bed, and then the kid's sitting by the toilet eating this fucking plastic wastebasket, so the mom kills him. It's a spoiler, but it happens right away, so if you're going to watch any of the movie, it happens immediately, so spoiler, kind of. Then she mentions how the kid drips saliva on it, like white saliva that dissolves it, which is like The Fly. So it's a foreshadowing. Maybe it's a cool callback. Maybe he just didn't have any more ideas.
Well, that's what I was kind of thinking. Is in a way, because you mentioned The Fly, and to be honest, I'd say for me, Cronenberg, my favorite Cronenberg movie would be The Fly. Not that I've seen all his movies, but I definitely did enjoy it. This movie seems like, I remember at a point in time in The Fly where Jeff Goldblum's character is talking to his girlfriend and trying to upsell, oh, I'm better, I'm more superior, look at all the things I can do. This movie almost feels like a future where that was continued, and this is now a reality where people are growing these new organs and not feeling pain, doing all these things. They're more superior in a way, and this is a realized future of the Fly character. It could even maybe be in the same universe. Who knows, right? I mean, it's out of Cronenberg's mind. So
maybe this is the next Marvel universe adaptation.
Oh man,
Cronenberg's universe.
MCU, so CCU maybe.
You never. All I know is that there's options.
Right.
You can only have so many Doctor Stranges.
Yeah.
That was an interesting point. That whole infiltrating, because he infiltrates that gang because Lang wants, for the new act, he kept his son's body in a cooler, and then he asked Saul to operate on it,
which
because
is also disturbing. But...
yeah, it's very disturbing. It's very weird. And it's a very sensitive subject, just about like a child's death, and then because he wants that to promote his purpose, because him and all of his, like in his cell, they've all manipulated their bodies, and they're trying to adapt what Saul is doing with the accelerated evolution syndrome. And they said, oh, the reason why my son did this is because he's the first child born with these organs, so he is part of the accelerated evolution syndrome. And then they go and do a surgery on that, and that's what made me think that Saul wanted to stop the whole art scene from becoming too disturbing, because of these cults that are trying to manipulate other people and children. And so that's why I think he willingly went to the cops.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I could see it as well.
Now let's talk about, we didn't even really dive into the people who were like in charge of like maintaining those machines, like the weird fucking bed and the autopsy machine. But interesting fact, again, this is going to go into spoiler alert. They kill Lang, and we don't know. We were thinking maybe they're part of the cops, and then maybe they're a rival gang. We don't know much about those either, but that was kind of an interesting, because that gets to the point of the ending of the movie where it leads to more. Why are they doing this? What's the overall message? What did you think about the reason why those two ladies killed Lang?
Yeah, I think it's a movie again that I think I would benefit from a rewatch, because. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really know what to think about it at the time, to be honest. And a lot of the movie just seemed very vague to me. Again, like I think it's probably partially because I had a hard time buying into this universe. But a lot of the motivations, whether it's with Saul or like his relations with the cops or the two women or Lang, a lot of the motivations of the characters were, at least for me, difficult to kind of suss out. Yeah, so I don't know. I was a little confused when I was watching this movie, especially when it came to the two of them.
Yeah, I think the best scenes, probably seeing them, well, like the evolution of, they saw this machine, they were fascinated, and then they wanted to see the performance, they were fascinated, and then they were very turned on, and then Leah said, oh, again, he's naked. So do they get naked, and you're like, oh, I like these characters, let's see where this goes. And then they kill Lang, and I'm like, that's even more interesting now. But it doesn't get unsolved. And then once he dies, they have Saul talk to that undercover, or the agent he's working with undercover, and he goes, oh, they're not working with you? Because like, no, I don't know who they were, da-da-da. And then Saul goes, well, now they're cult. Now they have the message that they needed, because now he's a martyr.
Right.
And my thought was, because the wife of Lang with the son, she hated him, and she hated the child that they had because of him. So maybe the ladies were linked with her because they seem to have a hate for Lang. And I think they wanted to kill him to send a message that these group is a terrorist organization. They're destroying this beautiful artwork, because they seemed really involved. They loved the old machines. They were wanting to get cut up, and they like that pain is the new sex, and that they wanted to send a message. And then when Saul made that comment, that also kind of tied together him wanting to wipe out this underground cult and not make the scene anymore. And because I think those ladies also just wanted to keep the scene sexy and fun and not make it any serious.
Oh, okay.
And then inadvertently they might have made a martyr and turned more people onto this cult, because then he tries that plastic bar and he smiles, and it made it seem like now he did fully believe and dive into that cult, and now he's a believer in the accelerated syndrome and thinks that people should eat, and the cult was really about like people eating plastic, and that's why that was the whole eco thing, because they're like, oh, let's eat plastic, this is what we bred in the world, let's solve plastic and eat it.
So from what I understood is like they're part of this terrorist sect, but like there's the ones that are saying that, oh, this is unnatural, like, you know, these growing these organs is accelerated evolution syndrome is unnatural, but Scott Speedman's character Lang, his son was the first example of someone being born to consume these plastics naturally, and that it wasn't like a surgery that caused this or anything like that. This was naturally, and that humans are actually evolving to deal with this stuff. And his son was an example of this, and that's why he wanted to promote this, to show people that no, this is a real thing. We are evolving. Like, this has to be accepted as legitimate. And there's, I guess, a certain sect that I think maybe wanted to keep this under wraps, maybe, at least maybe for the time being. And I think that's kind of, from my understanding, at least more of what was going on. And Saul just, I think, wasn't as politically motivated and was more artistically motivated in his endeavors, and kind of wanted to maybe straddle the line or stay on board. I think, yeah, I guess that's, I don't mean, not too different from real life. I think, like, you want to kind of stay maybe in the system, especially as a celebrity that has made you successful, and maybe you don't want to get into this whole political aspect of it, because who knows where that leads, right? So definitely a movie of questions, and I think a very philosophical movie that makes you take a look at these scenarios and these situations, and kind of just really, for me, it was, I don't know how I would react. I would be pretty creeped out, I think, if my child started eating plastic, and like I started growing extra organs, like that would kind of freak me out. I don't know how I'd react in this universe, but
all I know is that if someone paid me to cut it out, I think I'd accept the money.
If you still felt the pain, would you do it though? Because that's a big difference,
Depends on how much they're paying me.
Oh wow, yeah. Oof.
All I'm gonna say is, I don't know. That's an interesting point to be made. I would, yeah. Because like the next guy, I enjoy a couple punches and smacks here and there. I don't know if I'd like a full-on, organ removal, but, there's a first for everything.
Well, that being said, so I don't know if you can see it, but I have this scar here. It's 6 stitches that I got. And the way I got it was a work accident years ago, where like an X-Acto knife kind of slipped out for something I was cutting into my arm.
Workers' comp.
It was, but like I knew what happened immediately. It was just almost like, oh my God, like this has punctured me, like put my hand on it. And I looked at it, and I could see it, like, quickly filling with blood. I could see it, like, a little yellow, a little fat. Like, luckily I didn't hit any nerves or veins or anything like that. But, I didn't also, when that happened, I don't know. I don't know if it's just the adrenaline or the shock, but I didn't feel anything. So it's just like, yeah, I don't know. That's my only experience. That's all I can kind of draw upon when I look at aspects of this film. But
do you have any problems eating normal food? Do you feel like plastic is going to taste delicious?
I really like purple chocolate bars, or what I think are chocolate bars. Yeah, that was a weird one too. Was just the weird chocolate, or the weird chocolate looking. It was like almost like Willy Wonka, like purple bars.
It was like Laffy Taffy, but made of plastic.
Yeah.
Again, not a sponsor yet. But yeah, that was very interesting, and it took again like an hour to really understand what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like that was a bit drawn out, but
yeah,
it did come to somewhat of a conclusion. I think I'm going to sum it up in a couple points. Married performers, Saul Caprice. They like the art, but they don't want it to go too far. Lang's gang, the plastic eaters. They want to make it a political scene. So they're about the political. Married performers are about the moral sense. And then you have those two ladies, one of them who you went to acting school with.
Film school, yeah.
What was her name again?
Tanaya Beatty.
Their perspective on it, I think, was to keep it fun, sexy, and secret. So I think you have 3 mindsets. Morality, eco-friendly, politicalness, fun and sexy. And I think that's the moral of the movie.
Well, with that all being said, what?
Yeah, great sum up. Great long way to
honestly,
drag it
I think
out.
so. With that being said, though, what would you rate this film?
Now, I am an easy point giver, but I'm learning. I am learning to be more honest and to also rate things with objectiveness. That being said, I'm already skewed, and the titties weighed in, so I went from a 6 to a 6.5. That being said, the 6.5, what do I mean by that? It was an interesting movie. I definitely enjoyed it. It was not something that I would watch again, and if you're not a person who's interested in, well, body horror for sure, but if you're not a Cronenberg fan, I wouldn't suggest it to you. But if you're someone who likes an avant-garde, weird, gory, and if you are a fan of David Cronenberg, I definitely suggest it. I won't be watching it again, but if you have those interests, I'd recommend it to you.
Yeah, no, I was kind of bouncing back between 6 and 6.5. I think upon reflection, this is it's a Cronenberg film, so like you said, you should kind of know what you're getting into if you've seen any kind of Cronenberg film. It's a very philosophical movie as well, and I think because of that, it asks you a lot of tough questions. It presents you with a lot of like a tough reality for the future, and for those aspects, I like the movie, and I would give it a 6.5 as well. Yeah, it's a darker film if you're into that kind of stuff. If gore and body horror doesn't throw you off, and you're into sci-fi, this was his first sci-fi movie. I think almost over 20 years. I think you'll get something out of this, and I think it presents a lot of interesting questions, tough questions, and it's a dark film. There's not a lot of positivity in this world, so yeah, just know that going in and see what you think.
And a solid 13 out of 20, which means that it's a decent bush. It's a little overgrown, but it's just kept up and trimmed down.
I don't even know if it's a decent bush.
It's not a bad bush. It's the kind of bush that's grown over a bit, but it's maintained just enough to know that you still care, but that you also might be a little sad and depressed enough that you're willing to put in the minimal effort, but not enough to really impress.
There's a few pimples around the bush.
Ingrown hairs, though. What are you going to do about
that?
Yeah,
ingrown hairs. I think that's more accurate, definitely.
Apparently waxing solves that, though. You wax, I think it's 3 to 4 times, and that's supposed to solve that issue.
Something to consider. All right, so that's been our review of The Crimes of the Future. Another Cronenberg classic, maybe. We'll see.
Not to be confused with Crimes of the Future from 1970 by Cronenberg as well.
Yeah, don't confuse it with that.
I mean, you can't confuse it. It's only going to confuse you, not other people.
Same director, so it's understandable if you got confused.
Half points at trivia. You got that wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. See ya.
Bye.